Well, I want to join Dominique in welcoming everybody again. And new people, it's hard to know exactly who's here for the first time. If you registered but did not was not able to join us last week, you should have gotten a recording of last week's conversation. And and we're very glad to have you if you were not here, if this is your first time. And we're incredibly glad to have those of you who were here last week to return. It is my delight to see people take interest in what we think is important to offer as a way to help move the conversation down the road toward health and wellness. That's our primary work. Even though we call it by different names, the only thing we're really after is for people to come to be well in this world. We just have set it all up into categories that don't really mean anything, because ultimately all the only project is to be a well person and to be who God put us on the earth to be. And whether we are looking at race or gender or class or physical ability or any other thing, the bottom line is wellness. And that's all we're doing at the Center for Racial Healing, is working for all of us, as Howard Thurman would say, to get ourselves out of prison, to get ourselves out of prison. And we're really clear about that. And so all of the things we do are designed to help foster that process for people who join us. And we appreciate deeply your taking the time to come and be with us. It is my honor to introduce to you my friend and fellow pilgrim and colleague. And I want to read what I wrote, and I'm rereading it because there are new people. And I want you to hear what I had to say last time if you weren't here. And if you were here, you can hear it again. It's worth hearing more than once. Also want to say that Reverend Brackett and Dr. Meeks know that we have these wonderful titles, but we don't use them when we're talking to each other, because we're friends, and friends don't use their titles when talking to one another. But it is important in this culture for Black women, particularly, to always be honored. And I deeply appreciate Tom's way of being careful to do that. So just want you to understand that and to hear me say that. So, and then I want to just read this as a way of introduction. And if you have some need to know more than this, you can go look online. You can always find the stuff that's not as essential online. This is essential. Sometimes in a lifetime, a person is fortunate enough to encounter a person who it seems you have always known. Finally, your paths caught up with one another. And I imagine most of you on the screen have had that experience at some point in your life. You clearly recognize a kinship of spirit that is the gift of grace. And Tom is such a kindred spirit. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a part of this fine pilgrimage as a fellow traveler with him. What an unlikely candidate in some ways, but God and the goddess are always pushing us a few steps beyond the likely to the edges of healing. And I'm grateful for their unrelenting effort to do that. And it's always delightful to be in a conversation with you, Tom, and welcome again to this platform.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for those words. And this is our second second conversation in 3. And we very intentionally put our hearts and souls together over some months, actually, and decided that we would describe this as staying sober while living in a drunk world, conversations on navigating the contradictions of life. And an anchor for our conversation has been this beautiful book by Parker Palmer about the gifts of paradox and paradoxes in our lives on many levels. So let me start by saying it really is a gift to be with you all. And I am looking into this camera tonight in hopes of engaging with you, beautiful, passionate, creative, and thoughtful people from all over. And I think that the prayer that Catherine and I share is that through this conversation between the two of us, but also with you, that we might all come away half a shade braver. Don't you love that phrase? I carry that around with me like a talisman everywhere I go. Do these words make me, make us, do they empower us to be half a shade braver? My hope, our hope and prayer is that tonight's conversation will send you spinning into your world of contemplation and prayer and meditation, and that you'll join us in this commitment. This is an odd space to inhabit with Zoom. Some of the things we'd love to share with you would probably come across a little differently if we were face to face, like eye to eye. There's nothing like being in the same room close to each other. But this sure does make a huge difference for me to meet with you tonight. I've been hungry for this since last week's conversation. So I don't want to wait until we can do that. This is just right now. But I hope that you can hear our hearts in this conversation. We talked a little bit about this last night and yesterday afternoon in preparation for today. And there was such a deep sense of settling, my heart settling into the relationship that I have with you, Catherine. And I think we covered some topics that were really, I don't think we always talk about openly, and especially not in the church world. And so I'd like to just start this evening by naming that I am one of those, like I believe many of you are also, who you could say categorically, my whole life is in recovery. I came into the world in a certain form. I didn't have much choice over that. I came into a family of origin in a very particular context in the life of this culture. And so today, I can say by the grace of God, the goddess, I am in recovery from the racism with which I was brought into the world and taught. I'm in recovery from the earliest experiences of religion and religious bondage that I came into at the beginning of my life. I'm in recovery from these crazy urges to imagine that I don't need anybody, that I can be self-sufficient, because that's how I was brought into the world. So my whole life is this journey of recovery from alcoholism and racism and religious certainties and the need to be right. I mean, these all are trailing behind me, you could say. And it's the grace of God, cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, that dogs me and keeps me on this path, along with amazing friends like you, Catherine, like so many of you are on this, that are on this call. I know Brooke Suter from 2000 and 2001, 2002, and right at that moment when I was realizing my need for sobriety. I'm so glad to be still in touch with you, Brooke, even again tonight. So thank you for joining us. So we began our exploration, Catherine and I, talking about the role of scarcity and a scarcity mindset that drives many of us to seek either wholeness or some way of avoiding the very wholeness, the path to wholeness that we actually seek. And that role of scarcity, the link between scarcity and a drunk world, was kind of lost on me until our conversation last night. At one point, yesterday afternoon rather, at one point I remember turning to you sidelong and saying, I have to confess, I've not really fully grasped the link between scarcity and my own sense of alcoholism or dependency on external agency to make me feel whole. And you launched into this really beautiful explanation of that link. And I wonder if this is a good point in our conversation to come back to that, because I, for one, would love to hear how you explain that once again, Catherine.
Yeah. Well, scarcity is grounded in fear, and so is addiction. I mean, you're trying to fix something, and when you don't have what you need, you are afraid. And I know a lot about that. I grew up with real scarcity as well as imagined scarcity.
Mm.
Growing up poor and Black in Arkansas was an experience of scarcity. But also the reality part made it even harder not to get caught in thinking because this is scarce, then everything is scarce. And it may be that you don't have money, but it may not necessarily mean that just because you have money nobody's going to love you, because somebody somewhere is going to love you. But it's difficult not to generalize into everything.
Mm.
And when people are afraid, then they do whatever things they can do to deal with the fear. So in trying to fix the fear that has come from feeling like there's not enough and that you're not enough either, that there's you just walk around in this state of incompleteness and always feeling like you're just a little bit out of sorts, you're just a little bit out of place. It's like showing up at the prom with the wrong clothes on or something, that you kind of are in that space all the time, unsettled, a little destabilized, and not able to be grounded. So then you have to do something to deal with that eventually. And the addict is somebody who deals with that by whatever their addiction is, whether it's alcohol or drugs or sex or materialism or power or whatever it is. The idea is to feel more grounded. And so for me, the two are so connected, that people have this notion that they have to fix themselves with things external to themselves, that comes out of a lack of being able to go internally and look for where the answers might be. And I do think that, I'm so grateful that my fear of scarcity led me to the inner journey, because that's really the only place you can answer that fear, is because trying to answer it with externals, there will never be enough externals to fix it.
Yeah.
So, because if you're an alcoholic, you never quit, you never get enough. If
Mhm.
you're a materialist, you never have enough. No matter how much you have, there's always this sense that you need more in order to be totally secure. And so I think this notion of, it's so complicated, because it's the assumption of scarcity grounded in fear. It is also this notion that you can fix it with these externals, but you just got to have more and more and more and more and more. So you become a kind of a hoarder in a way. And you can do that psychologically, you can do it materially, you can do it with power, you can do it with anything.
Mhm.
And so I think, it's pretty amazing to really interrogate yourself about what you're when you catch yourself in a set of behaviors, to try to drill into what is this really about. It's kind of like, um, addiction to food. So when something good happens, you got to have a whole lot to eat. Something bad happens, you got to have a whole lot to eat, because you don't have any kind of way to process anything. I mean, you have this hollowness that's there from however you have made these tracks in your psyche by the ways in which you have lived. So I just think sometimes we just want people to get over it, and they just can't, because at the very core there's this hollow space that's grounded in a fear of that you won't make it, that nobody will care, and that you will not ever be good enough.
Mm.
So you
Mm.
have to just try to see if you can cover up that all those feelings and thoughts, and then you create this persona that's grounded in nothing really.
Mhm. It's
And we know people like that are just very hollow, and you can kind of get away with it until something really drastic happens, and then you kind of have to get to, if you don't have a core, you don't have anywhere to go.
mm.
I mean, everybody's got a core, let me not say that. If you don't know where the core is,
Mm.
if you haven't explored it enough to be grounded in it, then where do you go? So to more of whatever your drug is, your drug of choice. I always like to laugh about that my drug of choice is sugar. And so I have to be careful. Take myself off of sugar because I'll eat sugar. I'll eat sweet stuff. And I know better than that, particularly with arthritis. I know better than to have too much sugar. But whatever your drug of choice is where you're going to go when you get this challenge to the foundation that you're not familiar with.
It's good. I love something you said was akin to that saying, if you don't believe you're enough, then there ain't enough in the whole world to make you feel whole.
Right.
And yeah, my own experience, to tie into that, my own experience of the racism into which I was born and the racism on which I was raised was akin to chewing on steel wool. It was horrible. I knew it was horrible. It was the kind of thing like dogs do. Once you get going, it's so hard to stop. So years later, when I heard somebody describe the characteristics of people who have made friends with racism, one of the characteristics is this perfectionism. And I remember I brought that up yesterday afternoon. And your response was along addressing that characteristic of the perfectionism of racism. And I think you said something like, well, if you need to feel like you are the supreme being or you are supreme, you're better than everybody else, then you got to work really hard to keep that image up for both yourself and the world around you. That touched me. It made a connection for me. That list of characteristics is long, but that's the one that stood out for me. The perfectionism of racism, the Aryan supremacy that I was raised with.
Yeah, and that's another way to be addicted. You know, to be addicted to perfection, to and it's all about control and creating this false sense of that you really are in charge, and it reinforces your uh, assessment of yourself as this person that really can't be defended, but you have to, everything has to keep feeding into that persona that you've created. Because as I do this work in dismantling racism, I realize why sometimes it's so difficult to get people to begin to unpack any of that, because if you pull on any thread, the whole thing's going to unravel. And so it's just a matter of then hang on to all of it, because and I just can't stop believing that at some level, at the core of people who are caught in that space, that they know that this it's a space that can't be defended and maintained, and that's a part of the fear. You know, so it's almost like this circular kind of thing that you're in this, you know, it's untenable really, but you want to hold on to it, and so you just got to keep on being keep on reinforcing it, and the more you do it, the more you know that you're it's like you're on an errand, a fool's errand, you know. You know,
Yes.
it's like being on a wheel that just you can't get off of, I think.
That's good. It is that dogs chewing on steel wool thing.
Yeah.
Tears them to pieces and they can't stop, I think.
Yeah.
I came into religious fundamentalism along the same lines of addiction, where it was more important to be right than in right relationship. And I completely misunderstood righteousness as being, you know, beyond question or beyond fault or beyond blame, staying one step ahead of the person who might actually know me and my soul, because I didn't dare be known. So this whole idea of being religiously correct or doctrinally correct or liturgically correct. I work in the Episcopal Church as one of the senior leaders, and I think it is one of the greater challenges that we face with so many of our clergy, that this addiction to perfection and competence and professionalism often takes us toward being pretty brittle, fragile, ego personalities. Always have to be right. So early on in my experience of the Episcopal Church, actually through St. Patrick's in Dunwoody, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, I remember 1988 hearing Gray Temple talk about how many of us are addicted to certainties, borrowing from John Dewey, addicted to certainty. addicted to being right, as if knowing something was going to set my heart free, you know? But we live with that addiction, constantly pursuing one leg over the other person, a better argument, a better sense of certainty. And I wonder if that is something that translates across. I think it's not only clergy, but often people come to religion for those certainties. So God holds out relationship and we say, no, 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 I want certainty.
Yeah.
They follow me,
Yeah.
cloud by day, fire by night. No, 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 I want you to be in a box. Stay right here. I want to know where to find you when I come back. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Or I can't allow myself to trust that you are will come back, that
Mm,
you will, that because it's not, I mean, yes, where to find you, but that God will disappear if I don't keep God in this tiny little space, or in this understanding that I have. If I go on an exploration of larger things, then what will I find? And maybe God won't be there, and then all of my ideas about how to be in the world, I won't know what to do with that. So, but the saddest part about all that is there is no certainty. You get up in the mornings and you go out the door with the hope that you'll come back in the door at the end of the day, but there is no guarantee of that. It's just walking by faith and not by sight.
mm,
I don't know what we think that means. I actually don't know. I mean, it seems pretty clear cut to me that it means that you can't see because it hasn't even been laid out for you to see. And that's that whole notion of the abundance God, the abundant God, is that I think it's a matter of that God is sufficient. And if we would be willing to trust that and walk in it, then we have access to that sufficiency. But the fact that we don't have the faith to do that puts us actually in a more uncertain space than if we would trust that really God is can be trusted.
yes.
And I get it. I mean, it's not like I don't get it. I understand that's it's risky to have faith,
Mm, mm,
because the person may not be always faithful,
mm. Yes.
and we aren't always going to be faithful, but
Mm,
God is always going to be faithful.
mm,
And that is the difference, I think, between camping out in the place of trying to create certainty by the ways in which we carve out life and create isms and construct structures and put people in boxes and set up all kinds of systems that in the long run don't make any sense, and God probably laughs at us about, instead of trusting that God will be there.
yeah,
God, Jung said, called or not called, God will be there.
yeah.
And I hold on to that. I really believe that God will be there.
One of the circles of women that of which you are certainly one of the sisters, Catherine, came to me it was a privilege to meet them. They were grandmothers, survivors of the Guatemalan Civil War, some of the few
Mm,
that are left. And through interpretation, I got to hear some of their stories. And in the end, so moved to tears, just really pushed back on my heels. I was on the ground hearing their stories, so humbled. I
mm,
asked this silly question, what sustained you that you're still here, such hopeful women in your communities caring for all of us? They said, oh, one woman spoke in broken English, my faith in God. It was so obvious, my faith in God. And I remember writing in my journal that day several years ago, this ultimate paradox that I, as a white male in US culture, so struggled to grasp. They had joy etched on their faces. You could see they'd been laughing all their lives, that nothing had ever stopped them from giggling at the way God provides for them. The most joyous people I have ever met. And I wrote in my journal, less is more.
mhm,
Less is more. They had
mhm.
nothing. All they had is these bags that go over the shoulder, under the arm, and they had everything they owned in that bag. They could feed a whole village with what they had in that bag. And they were happy because they had their joy and their faith.
Mhm.
And I mean, I've heard that story from you over and over again, you recounting your journeys to here. And I always want to ask, as one impoverished by the culture I grew up in, where always we're taught more is more, is more, is more.
Mhm.
How do you get to the place where you actually believe that paradoxical claim, less is more? Less is more. It's
Mhm.
such a seductive consumerist culture I live in anyway, speaking for myself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it's, you know, I don't think you can talk yourself into it. I think you have to live into, I think it's a grace. I think it's a gift of surrender and understanding who God is and the goddess, and trusting that the abundance that is out there belongs to you, and you will get it as you need it, as it's best for you, and it won't always be how you have defined it. So it's about, I think it's ultimately about surrender, and not having, because we get caught up in the same mindset with God that as we do with everything else. We want God to do what we want God to do. You got to be my little errand runner here. I got this list and I need you to take care of it. And could you get it done by this afternoon? Because that would be convenient for me. And that's just not how it all works.
In the name of
And
Jesus.
so I think that coming to let go of all of that and realize you're not in charge of anything, and you must surrender yourself to the spirit and the work of the spirit, and that you are left with nothing but to walk in faith and to trust that the ground will be there because you're standing on ground, and when you take the next step that you'll find ground. And you have to, and when you get to that point, you stop thinking that you've got to own everything. Somebody said that one of the things Exxon had against the sun was it didn't own it. We have this, I gotta own it. I can't just enjoy it. I can't look at something and just enjoy it because, well, if it's that wonderful, then I must own it. And you get over some of that when you let go of this kind of notion that somehow you fill yourself up with what you own rather than God gets to fill you up.
It's lovely that God gets to fill me up. When
Yeah.
I say yes to that, I notice my heart turns playful and humble, and I
Yeah.
find a sense of courage like a child would have, because they haven't
Mm.
been taught yet to be afraid. Hearing your words tonight, that God is the one, the only one that can fill us up, calls me to that place of playful humility. I feel a grin growing on my heart. Like I've always known this, but to hear this again tonight calls me to that space where maybe I can be half a shade braver.
Well, we're just about going to have to turn to the audience, but I don't know if you have enough time to quickly say how just knowing that is an antidote against, is it antidote?
Mhm.
Yeah. The thing that stops you from doing something, stops you from dying if you get um, poison. Is that what, isn't that
Yeah.
what we call
Yes.
that?
Yes.
What,
Yes.
how is that understanding of God fills you up enough to help you stay sober as a recovering alcoholic?
Well, it's all about relationship. Once again, you'll get sick of hearing me say it, but I know you believe it as well. The mentors that came alongside me and walked with me from my house to the AA meeting every night for 30 days, and then another 30 days, had this profound wisdom carried around in this childlike trust that in the end all will be well. And it really will, because they're in their 70s and 80s and they can say, I've lived a full life and God has never let me down. And there's this sense of these really mature people who've been in recovery 30, 40, 50 years and lost partners and parents and brothers and sisters and lost their lives and hit bottom 2 or 3 times. And I meet them today, still to this day, and they're laughing like children. They absolutely believe that they can't go wrong. And all these little silly slogans like one day at a time, take it easy, all of those things were born out of this profound faith that if you really believe, you just have today. You just
Mhm,
have this
mhm,
moment. How can I be filled with courage and hope in the knowledge that I can't go wrong because I know who's looking out for me. That's where it comes from for me.
And that's how you stay sober in a drunk world.
Yeah. That's Jesus, or somebody like Jesus said, we attribute it to Jesus. He says, except you become as a little child, you can't get there. And a little child doesn't think I own this, or there's not going to be enough. I have to hoard. I got to work really hard. They see the one in front of them. Who are you? As my friend says.
Yeah.
Oh, you're God, and you're smiling at me. It's going to be okay.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Well, I guess we better let other people in on this conversation.
Thank you,
we don't get to just sit here and talk to each other the whole time. So, Dominique, how about if you put us back in the hold?
Sure, done.
Now we're in the hold with all of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then if you're still seeing just you, go to the right of your screen and click on gallery.
Okay. I just see you. There.
Yeah. You got it? Okay.
Yay.
Okay,
so we invite you now. You've heard us talk about scarcity and abundance and why we call this series Trying to Stay Sober in a Drunk World. And we invite you to join us in this conversation in whatever places struck you, or whatever question you might have, or whatever thought you might want to share in the 1 minute time limit that Ms. Hardy has set for everybody. So anyway, I just want to remind everybody to be concise, but we would love to have you join in the conversation too.
Dr. Black.
Good evening, everyone. To say that I'm loving these conversations is really a colossal understatement. I'm just absolutely loving these conversations more than I thought I would. And the thing I think that tonight brought up that's so important is the ways in which we as Christian folks, the ways in which we as God-fearing people read and take and interpret and present abundance as God's doing, as opulence, as a measure of God's love for us. And not only in our material lives, but even in our physical structures. We say God loves the meek and the humble, and yet we even create physical structures that cost millions and billions. Right. So there are ways that I think we have to dismantle the paradigmatic, very problematic notion that abundance, that material abundance is somehow reflective of something spiritually honorable or spiritually correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Powerful.
Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate that we want to say, if you're having a hard time, that somehow means that God's not with you. Right. That's not true. There's nothing, I've never read anything anywhere in any text that said suffering isn't a part of living on this earth. I've never seen that anywhere. So if you assume that just because you're doing all the right things and being the best person you know how to be, that you kind of escape the suffering, it is a misunderstanding of the truth. And I think it's important to know that, because it's all of us are, the promise is God will always be with us. That's the promise. And that whole business about, you got to get rich and to have 5 Cadillacs in your garage because you're such a good person and God loves you so much, is just to reduce God to an errand runner, as far as I can tell. So is it Divish? Is that the right way to say your?
Welcome back.
How do you say your name?
Divyesh.
Divyesh. Welcome back from Australia.
Yes.
Thank you for remembering, Catherine, Dr. Catherine and Dr. Brack and everyone else. And yeah, Divyesh is a Sanskrit name. I'm of Indian origin. And not boasting or anything, but it means ignorance in the middle of light in the middle of ignorance, Diva and Yesh.
Yeah.
It's a very grand title for someone who I don't think embody any of that, but snippets of it on a daily basis might just arise. But who knows? But I think one of the brightness factors is probably a little bit of that was coming here, albeit a little bit late. But we are in lockdown, so sometimes the hours I'm up till 4, then I wake up. But anyway, it's wonderful to hear the honesty, which was also shared today by by Tom Brackett or Dr. Brackett, or and because I am 14 and a half years, I can say it here because this is a lovely platform to speak it, but I'm 14 and a half years sober myself. And I had one attempt in when I was in England, relapse, because I was doing it for everyone else. Second attempt was in Kenya, where I was born, and I went back again after UK, and well, that went down because I took a trip. I used to go and binge drinks away from the country, so I'm not under the prying eyes of anyone at all. And then I came here, and 3 years in, the rock bottom so left me. The despair got me enough into coming here one day at a time. But the thing is, the drink might have gone, but all you talked about, the fear of uncertainty, the scarcity, the need for control, the grasping of things which I consider so-called groundedness, all these things are coming up now because the drug of choice might be down, but the shadow which Jung talks about and the complexes which he talks about keep on coming to be looked at in the light. And he has got a wonderful saying that what is dark, if it comes up to the light, doesn't remain dark anymore. And this is one of the faith I have. And I come from an Indian background of Hindu and Jain background. But when I hear what you guys speak, and when I've been to States, and that spiritual elements, the downfalls of more, and yet the upliftments which you offer are the same all over the world. And I come here one day at a time with the blessing that after hearing you, today's chances of not indulging the more and being okay in contentment and some sort of okayness, nothing great, is enough to carry and hopefully be not just a boon for me, but somebody around me. And the scarcity can subside for a while, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to attend this wonderful, loving gathering. Thank you.
Thank you, Divyesh. It's
Incredible.
good. Congratulations to my prayers go with you.
And then I missed what Kobe said. Thank you for that, Kobe. What would your day look like if you went the entire day being vulnerable? Just thought that was an interesting question that was posed.
What do you mean entire day? What about an entire life? I don't know about an entire day, because I think that for me, the effort is to live in vulnerability, to live with being open to the suffering and struggles of other people, and not to have a closed heart. I think that's what being vulnerable is about. So Tom, what do you say about that?
Yeah, the most powerful moment for me in my recovery was the first time I sat in a circle with others in recovery and said, "Hi, my name is Tom. I'm an alcoholic." All my life, I had said to people I trusted, I really just want to know people as they are, and I want to be known as I am. That was not the sum total of who I am, but it was something about myself I had never said publicly before. I had wrestled with it privately. Later in my recovery, I began to say, hi, I'm Tom. I would often stand in a pulpit in front of a congregation and say, "Hi, I'm Tom, and I'm a religionist in recovery." or I've been addicted to certainties and I'm in recovery, or I'm a racist and I'm in recovery. I remember several years ago, a semi-pro boxer was having dinner at our table, and I said to him, "It looks so easy. I don't see, it doesn't seem very complicated." And he said, "Oh, well, I'll tell you what, let me take you to the the boxing ring after dinner, and let's just try it out and you'll see. Something about getting hit a couple of times just makes you think about it so differently." So we got in, and we were dancing around and I was trying to dodge him and he caught me twice. And I realized, this is ridiculous. I had no idea. So what I did is I learned immediately to lie down completely flat on the canvas so that nothing was off the canvas, so that there was nothing he could do to me. And I often realized, like in my own life, as one living with a daughter with autism and mental illness, living in a healing community that is often oppressive itself, that's oppressive and unjust as a religious institution, has a long history of it, that sometimes it's the very best I can do is to get down on the canvas and say, "You're right, I'm down here on the canvas. I can't go any lower. I am who I am. I'm in the process of recovery. And I thank God every day for the community around me and the friends around me who know me for who I really am and still nod knowingly when I say, and I'm in recovery." Mm-hmm. To me, that is the ultimate vulnerability. It says, I am not self-sufficient like I was taught to be. I have huge holes in me and I need community. So I show up every time I get a chance and say, "Here I am again. I need you." That to me is vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Colby?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for this space. Just to kind of clarify my statement or my question, I agree that it should be an enduring and lifelong journey or acceptance, but I think that's philosophical and theoretic because, again, if we're talking about being drunk and we're talking about being addicted to something, that is a daily struggle. That's not a lifetime. And I think when you look at it, and I was just painting a picture of, can you imagine how much you keep in the dark in a day, less known a lifetime, when you think about being vulnerable, truly being vulnerable in a day? Mm-hmm. Just try to do it one day and not try to encapsulate it over 50 years and see what that struggle is like. And then you will know what it takes to live that out each and every day for the rest of your life. But you got to do it for one day. You got to see how you experience it for one day and see how much you really do not disclose to people when you engage them. And then what would that look like when you finally do let your guard down and you do let that light shine on you and you do let that truth radiate from you and how people receive it and accept it. And I think that's when you would truly find what it is in your place and where you stand with people, in yourself, in your environment. And it really calls to question what is your true purpose and what you should be doing and where you should focus yourself, because it puts everything in perspective just by looking at it in one day, 24 hours. And that's what I meant by that. Of course, I agree we should live a lifetime of it. I agree that we should do every waking day of it, but just try it for one day. Yeah. And you can get a true assessment of where you are and where you need to go and how far you are from where you really need to be.
That's beautiful, Colby.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Powerful. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Meeks. Were you about to?
No, the next person.
Okay. Here's the next.
Is that Bob? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Here's the next question. And then after that, Bob Morris, you're next. The question, and I just love this question. Can you both speak to what does surrender look like? How do you know when you have actually surrendered?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first thing is that you are at peace about things, that you quit trying to figure it all out. You quit trying to fix it. You quit trying to play God. I think that's you quit. You just quit. And you just say, I'm here and I'm gonna walk in faith and peacefulness and contentment and trust that what the way will unfold. I think that's when you know. I think that, and I think you know when you haven't done it because you keep on trying to figure it out. You you keep on thinking. You can bring your good analytical skills to this problem and figure out how to solve it. And you bring everything you've got and you still have a mess on your hands, or you just digging yourself deeper into something. And there's no peace to be found in that space because you're just in a state of being drunk. You're in a state, it's the same thing as if you had taken some drugs or drank liquor or whatever it is you could have done to destabilize yourself, to get yourself out of focus. So I think that if you haven't been paying attention enough to know when you're at peace and when you're not at peace, then that may be where you need to start with trying to discover what is it like to live a day in peace. This culture, that in itself is a challenge because if you watch the news and do all this stuff, we stay in a state of upheaval that you can't recognize what it's like not to be in that state. So that is a challenge too. So anyway, that's enough. Tom, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, maybe the surrender that I was describing earlier with the semi-pro boxer who invited me into the ring, that boxer was like trying to spar with addiction for me. I never won against addiction. And the response of surrender was that moment when I put everything I could in contact with the canvas. And I said, okay, this is it. This is where I belong here. In this bout, I belong on the floor. I don't want you, the boxer, or the addiction. In my life, it came as I heard the Spirit say to me, do you want to be theologically correct, or do you want to be in relationship with me? Which is more important to you? And I had to say for a long time, I really rather prefer theological correctness, God. I want to nail that one down. I want to have that one figured out. And God said, it was fine. You're in good company. You got plenty of people that keep you company on that venture. But when you're ready, I'll be here. And sure enough, when I was ready, God was there. So the surrender for me was saying, all right, I am powerless over this. This is how I came into the world. It's a part of my character. I don't have a heart. It's all hollowed out in there. Give me a heart to be in relationship with you, and that'll be worth it. That was surrender for me.
Wow. Reverend Brackett, if I may say so, you have to be one of the greatest teachers of all times and that I've ever heard in terms of lifting up the consciousness. That was very insightful. Thank you for that. Bob,
so just one second. Marian Anderson, no, Mahalia Jackson used to sing a song called "I Told Jesus He Could Change My Name." And I think surrendering is letting God change your name in the deepest sense of what that means to be reconstructed, to get out of the way the culture has told us we're supposed to be. It is very antithetical to the culture to be walking in faith. It's silly, actually, because we're supposed to plan everything and know everything and be able to hedge our bets all the time and control. That's the cultural way. And so faith is really silly when you put it up against that. And letting God change your name, letting Jesus change your name. I used to sing that song all the time. I told Jesus he could change my name, because you're not going to be the same person. If you sing that song long enough and really mean it, God will take you seriously and you will find yourself to be somebody else other than who you were. Hopefully somebody better in God's eyesight and not necessarily how the culture might see you. I'm sorry, Bob, to infringe upon your being the next person, but go ahead.
Beautiful.
That was well worth listening to. So
Beautiful.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Tom, I really appreciate the analogies of the weakness with addiction. 11 years ago, I was gravely ill in South America, hospitalized. My wife was with me. She was told I was not going to live. I had a very serious brain disease and comatose. And coming back from that, obviously I lived, coming back from that was a very long, slow process. Once I got back to the States, I was hospitalized in rehabilitation for a very long time. And just lying, being able to look out the window and see a bird, you know, I was reduced in your analogy to the mat. I was really down there where I couldn't get up. I had to learn to walk and talk and do lots of stuff that, you know, we don't even think about. And we get kind of sucked up, or in the language used tonight, addicted to our own competence. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm competent now. I can walk and talk, and I can reason, and I can argue, and I can fight, and I can be happy, and I can be sad, and so I'm competent again. And when you're an alcoholic, you go back to the weekly meeting, or the nightly meeting, or however, for whatever the frequency is that works for you. And when you were talking about changing your name, Catherine, I was thinking about, we go to the Eucharist to remember, to be remembered, not just to think about Jesus again, but to be put back together again. Mm-hmm. But so often that liturgy has just lost its power to us. And I don't know how to get back in that place. I often can't get back in that place where I was lying in that bed, unable to function, and just being grateful for the bird outside the window. But returning to those places, it is, and maybe it's because I'm a white male in America, but returning to those places is a vulnerability and weakness, and being happy about being there is hugely challenging. And any I mean, I have gotten lots of wisdom from things you said, but anything else you can say about being happy about being weak and powerless would be helpful to me. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes.
So I'm not going to always speak first, Tom. You go first this time.
Mm-hmm. Bob, thank you kindly for your telling us a piece of your story. And I'm just thinking about you, this visage of you lying in a hospital bed and seeing a bird outside your window, and the powerful breaking in of spirit on that moment, such that you could feel such profound gratitude and joy at seeing a bird. I think we each, I hope we each have had some moment like that in our lives to which we can return. I sense that so many of the mystics had that as an anchor in their consciousness. It was a bird, it was a mountain, it was a dream they had. It was waking up with their face in the dirt, realizing, I'm still alive, I can't move, but I'm alive. Coming back to that place, maybe that is the gift of that moment for you. And I wonder, I had an intervention like that in my own life, and I years later went back and sat on the sidewalk where 4 young men mugged me. And I sat there with the nurse that nursed me back to health, just to recall the huge gift of life that I received by that intervention of their brutality and violence. So I think somehow, Bob, you named it for yourself, for all of us. It is in our ability to return to that place where joy broke in the sight of a bird outside the window. That's the place to which we must return, I think.
Yeah. Yes. And I do think that you are correct, Bob, in your assessment that if you are part of a culture that has given you the narrative of being self-sufficient and supreme and all the things that white men have been taught in this world, it is a long journey to get there. But it is a journey that can be gotten to because God is capable, and God is more interested in us getting there than we are ourselves, I believe. So I think that all just putting one foot in front of the other with any tiny bit of intentionality opens up the possibility for that, for something to shift. And I trust that without really doubt. I believe that will happen, and that I've watched it happen for a lot of people, including myself. And I think it's a good thing to hold on to.
Mm.
So is Miss Kirkland trying to talk?
Yes, but we had one question before hers, and it's, Dr. Meeks, will you provide an example in your life when you experienced surrender as you defined it?
Well, one place is being a Black woman in America and having to come to grips with, what can I do about that? Except to figure out how to live as best I can in peace and wellness. And, you can try bleaching your face, you can try pressing your hair, you can try to be as white as possible in terms of what the culture requires. But ultimately, you have to let it go, because ultimately, at the end of the day, I've still got this Black face and this hair and this person that has to walk through a world that isn't interested in me. And I have to let that go and then pursue what it is that God's got in mind for me. So that's a great big surrender. But then the other ones are like with your kids, and you want to tell them what to do, and that's just a fool's errand, because the more you try to tell them, the less likely they are to do any of it. And so they teach you a whole lot about surrender quickly, the surrendering of your trying to be the ultimate authority in their lives. So I don't know, the examples just go on forever and ever. And then the other maybe harder part is letting go of stuff inside my head. I want something to be a certain way, but it's not going to be, it's going to be what it's going to be. And the quicker I accept that I don't actually know what it needs to be, I just know what I want it to be, the quicker I can get to, well, I'll give you a really quick example. My son and I lived together, my youngest son and I lived together. And we decided, my son became a gardener during COVID, and he decided that we should find a house to rent. And so we looked and looked and looked, and every house we thought we were going to get, somebody got it before we did. And after a while, I was starting to get a little bit antsy about it, because our lease was going to be up pretty soon. And then I sat on the side of my bed and said, we will find the right house for us, and I'm done worrying about it. That's surrender. When you just decide, if we don't find a house, we don't find one. If we do find one, we will find the right one. And we found the most perfect house. And my son said to me, Mama, of all of the houses we looked at, this is the best one. So that's enough. Let's hear Ms. Kirkland.
Thank you so very much. I'm listening, and it resonates with me to embrace surrender, the journey of surrendering. Even for a day, it's a journey for one day, and then the life. Would you please speak to the value of community as well as solitude? Because sometimes I find that as a leader, as a Black woman, as a care provider, all of your energy is going one way. And if you are going to get well, it calls for surrender and solitude. But at the same time, I realize that community is a great gift. Would you speak to how we hold those in tandem when we're on the journey of surrender. Because many people don't want you to surrender because you're also holding them up. Please.
Tom?
Ay, ay, ay. This is one of those paradoxes that Parker Palmer is talking about, isn't it? It's the longing to be in community, but from a place of wholeness that we discover often in solitude. And I can speak for myself and say, as one who cared for my paternal grandparents for 7 years in the Western Mountains of Maine until they both died in our home, my wife and I spent 7 years in relative solitude. We moved from Atlanta to Phillips, Maine to care for them. And yet it was that was like my desert experience, teaching me to learn, teaching me to be comfortable with myself and all of my quirkiness and my pain body and my old stories, and it got me ready to be in community. And I think I live in that tension. I think by nature, I do prefer solitude, and yet I know I need community. And so I think this is embracing the both and of the paradox. I think what you've just named there, I want to say, well, which is it? And God keeps saying both. You need, I want you to lean against that oak tree in the backyard and be present. And then I also want you to go and make yourself known and know people in community. I think it is a dance between both for me.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think it's about balance. You know, I may not appear to be, but I am a serious introvert. And I could stay in my house during COVID. Sometimes I did not go out of a door for like weeks. And now I have to remember that I don't have to live like that. And so I have to be intentional about going back into being with people. So I think that it's about balance, you know, consciousness and understanding what you need, and then balance. And I do need solitude if I'm going to do the stuff I do. And so I just think it's about balance. And someone had a question about what happens how do you take care of yourself living in the dissonance that's created with this paradoxical way to live? Because it does indeed create disruption in us, because there's something in us that wants to get on one side or the other. I mean, it's simpler if I can just be here and it's all clear and I can name this way.
I like buns like that.
Come here.
As opposed to the other side. So how do you hold those tensions without being eaten up by them? And I think a lot of it, again, is about balance, that you have to pay attention to the weariness and find ways to take care of yourself. And of course, our way of living in this world doesn't invite us to take care of ourselves. We're all supposed to be trying to kill ourselves, because whoever can do the best job of that gets the most toys at the end. And that's a silly way to live. So we need to really work on coming to grips with how much of it we can handle, and when we need to rest, and when we need to say no, and when we need to be crazy. You know, I had a therapist once who used to say, you can have a breakdown on the weekends. You know, you just keep it together for 5 days and have a little breakdown on Friday through Sunday, so you can be back into the craziness on Monday. I don't quite want to live that way either. So I think that I can't say enough about the necessity to be really careful to seek balance in just all of this. I mean, the paradoxes are not ever going to go away. The dissonance is not ever going to go away. So we have to manage the dissonance in some way ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves in the midst of it, because it's always going to be there. And I'll get up in the morning and wish that I could have my little constructs and structures and fill up my little boxes and make everything be the way I want it to be. And none of that's going to be true. None of it. It's just a wish, an empty one at that. And if I try to make it so, then I do damage to myself. So last words, Tom. We've run out of time here.
Peter, I wish we were all in the same room together and we could just stop here, take a break, and then come back together and have more conversation. This has been really beautiful tonight. So I'd like to reiterate the hope and the prayer for each of you, with each of you, that maybe you look across your screen and see these thumbnail pictures of each of us, or our avatars if we don't have our video on. Look at these beautiful people who've shown up literally from around the world to have this conversation about living in this both and crazy world we're in, and draw from the strength of these beautiful spirits so that we can join you in praying that your heart, your courage may have made you just this half a shade braver, that you take this message out into the world around you. You know you're surrounded by people who would love to hear this message. Take this with you. Let this be on the tip of your tongue when we're tempted to think of it's an either or world, to really bring it back around to this, the power, the invitation, the beauty of living right smack in the middle of this tragic gap that we inhabit. So I bless you in this work, and I hope we get to see you again next week. Catherine?
And I want to say this particular explanation. I have been doing the work of racial healing for 50 years, and we don't often find Black people and white people who talk about things together other than race. We always assume if there's going to be a conversation, it's just going to be about race. And so one of the goals here with this program, this conversation, is to model what it could look like for a Black person and a white person to tell each other the truth. Because if we don't learn how to start doing that, we're never going to dismantle racism anywhere, because it's going to boil down to relationships of trust. Trust enough to tell each other the truth, and to commit to being in relationships with each other where we tell the truth. And so I said to Tom when we talked about this book, let's do this way, not only to model how another way to approach trying to teach, but also to model what it looks like for a Black person and a white person to talk without talking about race specifically, having it be it is not the only conversation that we're capable of having with each other, and we need to quit acting like it. And so I want you to know that there's an intention here to model something that I hope that people will see as a way to engage. And I hear so many white people saying they don't know how to talk to Black folks and they're scared. And I want to say, we need to stop that. We need to fix that. We need to work on that. And this is one way. This is to model a way to go forward, that life is about universals, and it doesn't really matter what culture you happen to have been born in, what language you speak, what foods you like, what clothes you wear, what ways you pray. There are universals that affect everybody, and we can find ways to connect at that place of those universals and stop acting like we don't know each other, because we can know each other, and it's not even all that hard, really, if we make up our minds. So I want to encourage you to pay attention to who crosses your path and to what you are saying to them based upon having been here tonight. And let us all be a little more courageous with being conscious of who's in front of us and what we might say to that person, and how we might be present to that person that we might have decided not to speak to just because they didn't look like us or we thought we didn't have anything in common. So
Mm.
I'm preoccupied about it, y'all. I want us to fix racism in the world, and we're not gonna do it unless we turn ourselves into being vulnerable to each other enough to build relationships and tell the truth in those relationships.
Wow.
So thank you so much for being here and for being people who care, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. And it makes it easier to get up in the mornings and keep doing this work, knowing that you're out there all over the place, standing for what is good and right. And thank you, Dominique, for always being the good manager of all of what we are doing here. It's just wonderful. And I hope to see you. We hope to see you next week. And someone asked earlier about finding The Promise of Paradox. It is out of print, and some people think they can sell it for a fortune because it's out of print. But if you scurry around on the internet, you can find it in some odd places. So you just have to look and be vigilant, because I found a few copies of it, but I wish they would reprint it, and maybe write to Parker Palmer and tell him that would be a good idea too. So we'll see you next Thursday, and God be with you.
Thank y'all. Peace.
Take care.
Thank you.
Tom, do you have 2
Thank
seconds?
you so
I
much.
do.
Okay.
Good night.
Dominique, can we stay on without?
Sure, let me stop the recording.
Okay.
Mhm.